Gwen Lehman again, with the third story in my series of Pastor Blunt stories, a story which is actually called Pastor Blunt. Pastor Leroy Blunt sat on the edge of the motel bed. He had just tied each shoe tightly, adding a quick spit shine to their toes. Sue Dean Wells was still in the bathroom, tidying herself up, as she liked to say. Her new dress lay across the unmade bed, along with a pair of real nylon stockings and an alligator purse, its beady eyes staring up at him. She'd insisted on that purse, and he had given in, and then she'd needed a new dress and had to have them stockings after showing him how her old ones had ripped. He surmised he'd have to call on the Lord for help again, sooner than he'd planned. Leroy stood and stretched a kink out of his back, then crossed to the mirror on the dresser to check the knot in his tie. "Dang," Leroy said to himself admiringly, "you is one handsome fella." The phrase handsome is as handsome does did not come anywhere near to his mind at this point in time, nor likely to the mind of Mrs. Sue Dean Wells. As little mind as she had, there wasn't much room for thought, especially not on that particular topic. It was hot in the room, and all the moisture in the air was being dissipated by the fan spinning its blades above Pastor Leroy's head. It was nearly noon, and they had not had breakfast, had feasted the night before on thick steaks and thicker slices of watermelon, had bought a bottle of Jim Beam and some Coca-Colas, and sat under the stars on the motel lawn and drunk themselves silly, Sue Dean murmuring now and then, good Lord," as she wiggled her toes out of her shoes and into the clipped southern grass. "Leroy?" Sue Dean was standing in the open doorway to the motel room's lavatory, a large powder puff in one hand. "Would you mind patting my back with a bit of powder? I did not know it could be so hot." Pastor Leroy Blunt turned to his parishioner then and gave her a slow smile. "Course I will, darling." "Oh," said Mrs. Wells, "I do love it when you smile like that." "Let me have that puff." He crossed to her in her white slip, stockingless, painted toenails true red, a sheen of perspiration on every inch of her skin. She looked a delight to Pastor Leroy, sensual and alive, full of fire as she turned her back to him, reaching over her shoulder to hand him the puff. Tiny hairs had come loose from the bun she had made of her hair and hung down along the nape of her neck in soft, downy curls. Leroy bent down a bit and blew gently on the back of Mrs. Sue Dean Wells's neck. "My swan," he whispered, letting his lips touch ever so softly the skin on her shoulder. "My prince," she responded. "You make me want to praise the Lord in every which way, but I'm too hot right now." She turned suddenly, her chest to his now, and looked up into his eyes. "I do feel a little lightheaded after the night we had. Perhaps you could run out and get me a Coca-Cola before I pass right out. Could you do that, Leroy? A Coca-Cola and a photoplay magazine." She plucked the powder puff from his hand. "I can powder myself." "It's near to noon," said Leroy. "I thought we were going over to that diner across the street, see if they'd scramble us up some eggs and grits." Sue Dean had crossed back into the bathroom where she had left an open box of powder on the side of the sink. Dipping the puff into the dusty pink particles, she began to apply powder in brisk puffs across her chest, along the back of her neck, over each shoulder, under her slip, watching herself lovingly in the mirror as she did so. Leroy looked over his shoulder at the yellow voile dress laid out carefully atop the mussed-up sheets. His seersucker jacket hung carefully, stretched across the back of one stained chintz chair. He needed to get them out of this room, on the road, headed somewhere. Louisiana, most likely, where any number of rural backwaters must be aching for a preacher to stop by and start him up a church. "How long you gonna put that powder on?" Leroy asked. "As long as it takes," Sue Dean replied, "and that'll be about as long as it takes for you to run and get me a Coca-Cola and a magazine." It was tempting then to leave Sue Dean Wells, leave her to powder herself to her heart's content. He could shrug his wide shoulders into that seersucker jacket and head off to that diner on his own, have himself a big old breakfast of scrambled eggs and grits with a side of sausage, fill up the Buick, and head across the Florida Panhandle for New Orleans. They'd only been on the road 8 days, but he had already been tempted a number of times to leave Sue Dean Wells behind. He almost did once in Savannah, her curly head nestled into a pillow, him punchy from the night before, and sore over the insistent way she had to visit every dress shop they passed. Seemed every stop they made, Sue Dean had some necessity she was asking him to purchase. A pair of sandals, white with a gold metallic bow, hairpins, that large box of powder, a sundress in 2 shades of lilac, a hat with a wide brim to frame her face in the loveliest way. Which is why he realized he hadn't left her yet, that face being framed in the loveliest way. Mrs. Sue Dean Wells had stopped puffing at herself with the powder and was sliding the lid back over the top of the box. "I guess I would just have to get right back under that shower and cool myself down," she warned. She picked up a hairpin and ruched it in the back of her hair, pulling the loose bun a little tighter. "I cannot seem to get you to move, although I've been standing here before this mirror praying silently for you to do so. I used to believe in the power of prayer, Pastor Leroy. I used to believe. Pastor Leroy Blunt could see in the mirror the shadow that cascaded down between the soft pillows of her breasts, could see the rise and fall of her chest through the thin silkiness of the full slips she wore. He could detect the straps and bands of lacy undergarments he had bought her on their last stop, could see the strong, smooth muscles of her thighs and calves, the high arch of the foot she had raised into the air behind her as she leaned toward the mirror, lips in a pout. "You want that Coca-Cola with ice?" he asked. Sue Dean Wells smiled.